Hi everyone. Bit of a different one today, bit of a personal one as well. It's coming up to the 10th anniversary of my father's passing, and I wasn't quite sure if I should do anything for it or if I should just let it pass by, but I don't know. A decade seems quite substantial and it feels like maybe I should do something for it. I decided that I would dig out the eulogy that I wrote for his funeral, and I would give it a reread and record it and immortalize it in a way. But turns out I seem to have lost the manuscript for the whole proceeding, and I was quite sad. It wasn't where I thought it was. Moved house 3 or 4 times, but I did have it buried in my emails. So I've gone back and I've found it, and I haven't read this thing in 10 years. I did intend to read it myself. I gave my mother's eulogy at her funeral, and that was only 14 months prior to my father's passing, at which point I was not in the best state of mind, so I had the minister read it for me, and it's something I've always regretted. I think now is probably the best time for me to do it now. Anyway, this is the email. You see, 6th December 2014. I've not read this in 10 years. Here we go, I guess. I mean, I may paraphrase it and skip over a few bits as well. My father. How can any words encompass what he was to me, to his family, and to his friends? We were different in a million ways, and in just as many the same. Too soon, I'm here again trying to make sense of it, and trying to find a meaning as to why I now have to face everything without you or my mother beside me. Trying to avoid the feelings of injustice. I'm sure the enormity of it all will come crashing down on me anytime soon, but right now, all I can really do is think about all of our time together and try to identify parts where you and Mum were trying to teach me something. I'm lost and alone without your guidance and support, and now I need those lessons more than ever to help me through. But how can I sum up someone who I spent a lifetime idolizing? By listing your idiosyncrasies? By throwing around a load of adjectives? He was strong, smart, loyal, caring, crazy, funny, opinionated, etc. All things that everyone knows anyway. But you were greater than the sum of your parts. You were my father. And no one with any of those distinguishing traits can add up to what you were to me. When I think of my dad, I guess an apt way for me of describing him would be, he was a man from and of stories. He did so much in his time that to try and distill it into a form that can be swallowed in these next 30 minutes or so is an impossible task. But if you knew him, my dad always had a tale to tell. And growing up, I lived vicariously through those, always dreaming of crafting memories as exciting as the ones he would describe. It is a great tragedy that sons never really get to know their fathers until later in life, and until I grew up, and to a lesser, sadder extent until the loss of my mother, stories and tales were how I knew my father. The things he'd seen, the things he'd done, whether exaggerated, told in a fashion to teach me something, or told with an inebriated honesty. That's how I knew who my dad was. He was Johnny Brooks, through name and reputation. Later on, we became close friends, and I don't think either of us would have got through losing my mum if we didn't have each other. But my whole life, I had always dreamed of being as great as the man depicted in those stories. I'm so fiercely proud of being his son that it drove me to do all I could to make him proud and make other people know and say, "That's John's boy." Last year I spoke of how my mother instilled my morals and values in me, and my father was of equal influence in that respect. If my mum was the heart and the inspiration, and my dad was the soul and the means. And together they took on everything, and they sat me and my sister on their shoulders and made us feel like we could too. They taught me to be humble, and then they offered me the world. God, this is hard. They gave me and my sister everything we could have wanted, inspired and encouraged us in every way, and expected nothing in return. It saddens me that I could never weave as many tales of my own as he did, and that my future children will be deprived of hearing him tell them his in his own enthusiastic way. So it boils down to us to continue to tell his stories, whether you knew him, knew of him, or wish you didn't know who you were at the time. To carry on talking of his exploits and hidden treasures of wisdom amongst them. To keep him and my mother alive in our hearts, our thoughts and our words. Everyone has a story about Johnny Brooks, and everyone should hear one. God, that was harder than I thought it was going to be. I don't think I could have done that on the day. Not the state I was in. I was strong enough to do it for my mum. And I wish I did have the strength at the time to do it for my dad as well. But, God, it's really got me. Speaking of stories, here's one of my father. Maybe a couple. My dad was a bit of a rough and tumble guy. He had a scar from down here to here on his face. Many others as well. That particular one he got when he was thrown out of a third-story window. I won't get into the reasons why that happened. Suffice to say, he was a bit of a troublemaker. But he fell through, and he actually landed on the top of an underground garage. Say underground, it was below, it was sub-level, but it had kind of a fiberglass roof. So he fell 3 stories. That broke his fall. But it split his whole face open, and it cut his arm open from here to here to the point the muscle fell off and out of the bone. And he got up, and he held his muscle in, and he reached to his face and realized his hand went through his cheek. And he walked himself to the hospital. I don't know how he done it. But they stapled him up. Literal, huge staples. And wrapped him up like a mummy. So I must have been maybe 5 or 6 at the time. And this happened while he was out one night and my mother was looking after. He'd come home in the middle of the night. And I ran into my parents' room, as you do when you're a kid. You know, wake up, mum, dad. And there was this bandaged mummy just sitting up in bed in front of me, black eyes, bruised, bandages still kind of covered in blood, and it was terrifying. I screamed the house down and ran out the room. So after that, he healed and everything, but he ended up having a tremor in his right hand from that day onwards, and his last two fingers, the index, was a ring finger, little finger. They kind of shook from then on. And I think I was 14 or 15 at the time. And my father was coming upstairs to knock on my door and tell me, dinner was ready. But he tripped as he was going up the stairs, and I had a guitar amp, quite a large guitar amp, at the top of those stairs. He tripped, fell forward head first into my guitar amp, put his hands out to try and protect himself, obviously, as you do, destroyed the amp to bits, like it just exploded on impact. And he was swearing and then going, F this, F that, as you usually do. Danny, your effing dinner's ready, just come downstairs. So anyway, once the pain had passed and he'd got over falling through the embarrassment of falling through this guitar amp, it wasn't until about 45 minutes to an hour later that he realised that tremor had completely gone, something that he'd had for the last 10, 11 years of his life. The story has no point, it's just a story. Another funny one is, and this goes to show how much of a family man my dad was, he once found himself out of work. My mother didn't work, she was a stay-at-home mum. And things were getting pretty tight, we had no money, just had 2 kids to look after. But my dad was a bit inventive in ways that he could make money. He was a labourer at the time that was just out of work. So what he did, he he knew of a street somewhere that had certain paving slabs on the sidewalk/pavement. And he knew they were very expensive slabs, and he knew where he could sell them. So he put on a high visibility jacket. He called up a friend and said, hey, do you want to make some money? Let's do this. And his friend went, yeah, okay. And they drove a van to where this sidewalk was and basically just put a bit of tape around an area, and they had a big stone cutter, and they cut the paving slabs off the floor in broad daylight that had only been installed for about 2 weeks. So passers-by and locals, they were saying, what's going on? And my dad, who's got a high visibility jacket on, obviously someone assumes he's a construction worker. He said, there was a mistake with these, we just need to change them around. And no one batted an eyelid. They just let my dad and his friend get on with it. They cut up the entire sidewalk, put it on the back of the truck, took it to the stone yard, and got a few £1,000s for them, and that fed us for a week and a half. He literally stole the floor in front of everyone. He was an interesting man. I miss him. Anyway. I don't know what else to say. I guess I will talk to you guys soon. Take care.